On this week's episode of the Nittany Dispatch, we will talk about some harrowing Illinois travel, discuss James Franklin's press conference where he did some push-ups in front of the media today, talk about the upcoming big matchup with Iowa, and then we will wrap things up with some predictions on this week's episode of the Nittany Dispatch. Hello and welcome into this week's episode of the Nittany Dispatch. I am John Sauber, the Penn State football beat writer for the Center Daily Times, and I am joined, as always, by Audrey Snyder of The Athletic. Audrey, how's it going?
It's going, John. Happy to be here at the Nittany Dispatch. This is a special Whiteout Week edition. We're just getting launched here. I am happy to be back in the audio space. I know it's been a minute. But this is season number 14 for me. What season is this for you, John?
Oh boy, I think this is
Sorry,
five.
I told you no math. My bad.
Yeah, I know. This is 5 total. I was the secondary beat writer for 2 years, and now this is my third as the primary here. It is going by quickly. I think quicker than I ever anticipated it would. It feels like yesterday when I was mostly terrified for the game against Wisconsin. Was my first game I ever covered, was a road game in Madison. First game I ever covered by myself, I should say, in Madison.
Coming off the COVID,
different time.
Yeah,
right. And so it was a different time for everyone too. And somehow, some way, the travel this weekend is up there. It's competing for my Madison
was interesting.
Travel. Back then it was a 4 a.m. flight. It was not sleeping the night before because I was scared I was going to miss the flight. This week, much different.
You're scared about doing the job. You can say that. It's okay.
That's right. I wasn't scared. I was terrified.
Fair.
This week was, as people will find out, you and I are on a lot of the same flights. I mean, I think as a lot of the beat is. And we woke up to get ready for a 7 a.m. flight that I found out at 5:30 when I woke up was delayed into 1 p.m., which is not ideal. The sleep after that was not great. I did not fall back asleep for a while, and I was not fully prepared for that. I'm not one to complain about extra sleep. I think that's the first time in my life that I've been pretty upset that I had to sleep for an extra few hours.
It was just weird. It's one of those, you're like, all right, you're kicking off the season with a 6-hour flight delay. I will say I pride myself on being a good sleeper. So I appreciated the sleep. And honestly, I was ready to get in the shower and go to the airport. And then you texted me and were like, hey, we have a flight delay. So always looking out for me right there. And then
that's right. Veteran leadership over here.
Yeah, you probably just said that, though, because I was the one getting the rental car. And then otherwise you'd have been stuck at O'Hare without me. But I mean, that's life in the Big Ten, right? I mean, both you and I live here in State College, which I think gives us an advantage and a unique perspective on how we cover the team because we are at everything. But I think it also makes for some of these hairy travel situations that I'm sure are bound to pop up throughout the season. You've probably, even just in a few years on the beat, you might be the person who spent the most time in a car with me. The other,
that's
Mark Brennan would definitely be up there, though. Like, Mark has spent many car rides with me. But I think that gives us a lot of time to talk about the game, talk about the beat, talk about what we're working on. And that's a lot of what we want to do here, too. I mean, I think that's part of what excited me. We were talking about getting back into the audio space and having the opportunity to do that. I mean, nothing changes with our day jobs, right? Like, we're still going to be cranking out content. I'll be doing it at The Athletic. You'll be doing it at the Center Daily Times. But we just want this to be a space where we can talk about Penn State a couple times a week with you all and just kind of give our thoughts, talk to you after games. And obviously, we're starting during a week where there is a lot going on. During the whiteout, pretty daunting task on our behalf, but we're happy to be here. We're recording this Tuesday night, so kind of the rhythm of the beat is Penn State's always off on Mondays. James Franklin always talks Tuesday afternoon, and pretty much Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, it's a sprint. Then we get a breather on Friday, and then Saturday, it's just nonstop all day. But John, let's start with James Franklin's press conference today, because we've been doing this for a long time.
It was a weird one.
It was interesting,
even for the weird standards. So James mentioned at the top of the presser that it was the 17th whiteout, which is not the case. It's the 15th full stadium whiteout. It's the 19th partial or total whiteout, I guess, if you want to count the 4 partial whiteouts. And James saw you making an
I
Audrey Snyder
listen,
face, which we've all seen many times. I know the look
I
I did. You were sitting to my left, so I could not see you, but I also definitely saw the face you were making in my head.
you know what? It's
And
my
he,
default. Confused is
yeah,
my default. And as he said it, he was like it's like this is the 17th whiteout, and I'm guaranteeing you, like this is gonna be the face that I'm sure I made. It was like, you sure? Um, because it's not like as you said, it's the 15th. But then that just led into this whole moment where he looks at me and is like, "Hey, like why?" Like the quote in the transcript is
yeah, it's in the
Audrey,
transcript for anyone who would like to see this.
Audrey, your face. And then it just cuts to me. So there it's out there on the record, James Franklin just saying, Audrey, your face. And then I kind of explained because I was like, I'm pretty sure this is the 15th. He said that he had gotten wrong information on the number of whiteouts. And I was like, no, I got that it's the 15th from your in-house, game notes that I read every week. Um, but yeah, so then he's like, well, hey, if you're wrong, you have to do 5 push-ups. If the person who gave him the information is wrong, he has to do 5 push-ups. And I'm like, okay, like this is really awkward, but here we are coming hard out of the gate. Turns out I was correct. So James Franklin then dropped down and did 10 push-ups,
I
5
believe
because he
yeah,
was
yeah,
wrong, and then another 5 because he didn't double check the fact that he said.
that's right.
So I have not seen that in all my time on the beat. He's never done push-ups in a presser. But I think that actually, like, to me, that moment is interesting because it shows that he's loose this week, right? I mean, we've been in there on Tuesdays where he comes in, kind of makes a beeline for the table, sits down, and it's just like, okay, how are you guys doing? Opening statement. Today, it felt really relaxed. It felt playful. And I think that's a good look at where his head is with this team. And let's be honest, John. I mean, if you're him, you should be feeling really good right now with a team that's ranked 7th in the country, and that pretty much by all standards has looked pretty good.
Yeah, and I think the calmness has been a theme, right, for him at
Hmm.
press conferences, and not just press conferences. Like we have those Wednesday scrums after practice, even post game. Like he just feels more loose. He feels relaxed. He feels like he kind of wants to be there, which I like you mentioned is definitely not always the case.
I mean,
Um,
listen. I think when you see our faces in a
yeah,
room,
it's
right
not.
away you
This
say,
isn't.
"I want to be there." Right?
Yeah, right. This is the
Yeah.
sunniest, most welcoming beat on the planet. That's for sure. But no, I think like we've seen that disposition from him because he has an air about him. He has a confidence to him and what he thinks this team can do. And he hasn't really outright explicitly said that, but again, you can see it in the actions. You can see in the way that he talks about players. There's more of a willingness to praise, I think, than I've seen in years past. Right, like he's been more.
The
Um,
Katron Allen praise
yeah,
early on
that's the
was
first thing
really
that comes to
obvious,
mind.
really outright a couple weeks ago. Yeah.
Yeah, when Katron didn't maybe receive as many carries as I think he probably would have wanted
Yeah.
against West Virginia, and then James mentioned it before the Delaware game, and he praised Katron, said he hoped people value Katron as much as they do, and I think it was one of those scenarios where he wasn't talking to us, he was like using us as a vessel to talk to
Hmm.
a lot of people, right?
The
Because
people
I think
beyond the camera. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Because I think the people on the beat have seen Katron Allen play well, and we've all seen that, he is a majorly valuable piece to this team, a majorly valuable piece of this offense. But James was definitely trying to make a point there, which I think if that's the benefit, I think for these press conferences in general, there is always something that is being said behind what's actually being said, right? Especially in those
Yeah.
opening statements when something out of the ordinary is mentioned, when things like that happened, or even just today where he was more relaxed and you could see how relaxed he was. I think there is a lot to learn from these things, and honestly, that was my biggest takeaway today. That he is. This is a whiteout game against a defense that I would argue is a top 5 one in the country, and he's just kind of chilling. You know what I mean? Like he clearly feels good about where they're at.
And I think it's interesting too because he has this confidence, he has this calmness, and hey, you're doing this with a first year starting quarterback. But as he said today, he's tired of being asked about the first go around for Drew Aller, right? It was first, it's the first start, then it's the first road start. Well, now it's his first starter in the whiteout. And James Franklin's like, you know what? I'm done with the first. We're here to play games and like, let's move on. Uh, but to me, I think, yeah, that confidence definitely extends to his quarterback. And another thing that he said Tuesday that struck me as interesting, he said, he's not hearing complaints about tight ends not getting enough targets or what maybe we think are enough targets. He's not hearing complaints from defensive ends who maybe their stats aren't as stuffed on the stat sheet as a lot of us expected, despite just having a monster game, stopping the run against Illinois. So I think you kind of take all of that, you piece it together, and you say, you know what, it sounds like behind the scenes, one, we know this is a really good team. We're seeing that week in and week out. But two, it seems like he's doing a nice job of balancing that, right? Because you're balancing egos, you're balancing playing time, and let's be honest, in the day and age of NIL, you have to balance all of that too. And I wrote about this last week at The Athletic, and I said, you know, this is his most talented roster at Penn State. And how do you keep everyone happy? Because there's no way this is going to be easy, right? How many times have we heard, you know, oh, we think that this guy's a co-starter, or we believe that this guy could start for another team, or let me tell you guys how valuable this player is to our roster, because these are all the dynamics that are at play. And if you're Penn State, this is a really good problem to have, because this is what you've been waiting for so long to get to this point, right? This is a testament to how well this program's recruited, but also how well they've developed. So again, I think this week it's just another showcase, taking another step forward. And oh yeah, you're doing it at home. The atmosphere we know is going to be crazy.
Yeah.
But I think you've got a quarterback who looks like he's built for this, John. What have been your early impressions of Drew Aller so far?
I mean, it's to toot my own horn here, as people will learn to listen. I love to, or the listeners will learn that I love to do more than anything.
Great. Can't wait.
Taking credit for all of the takes that I am very willing to fire off. It's just kind of validating a lot of the stuff that I know that I said last year, that a lot of people on the beat said last year. This is not a common refrain, I know, from necessarily all the beat writers, but I thought he should have been the starter last year. I wrote back in, I want to say it was early October. It might have been late October, somewhere around the Ohio State game, that he should have been starting. And I think a lot of the issue with that discussion last year was people made it about, okay, if you start him, you're not thinking about this year, you're thinking about next year and preparing.
Right.
And
The whole, hey,
I
you're
never,
punting on this year. That was
right.
definitely, yeah, that was
And
an error for sure.
and I never thought that was the case, though. I thought he was just their best quarterback last year. We saw glimpses of it in Purdue, especially in Ohio. I think the Ohio game was really the wow moment, right?
Mhm.
When you saw him, he can make every throw in the book. And I know James keeps calling him Steady Eddie and keeps referring
Which,
to.
by the way, I want to point that out, John, because that is among the James Franklin praise terms. If he calls you a steady Eddie, that's like the highest compliment you can
Yeah.
get, right? Because he used to always say that about Trace McSorley. He used to
Yep.
always say that about Saquon Barkley. So when he said that last week, I was like, yeah, steady Eddie counter. Like that's one of those you take
Yeah.
note of.
And it was at least the second time he had, because I think he said it midweek last week, and he said it again in the post-game press conference
Mhm.
after Illinois, after a game where Drew wasn't great, right? Like I think that
Yeah.
maybe I've rewatched the game already, and I know you do the same as well. I don't know that his performance was as bad as the numbers said. There were drop issues with the receivers. There were, I think, some timing
There's
issues with receivers too, and not
DeAndre
having Trey
Lambert
Wallace out
Smith
there.
wide
Yeah.
open. I mean, that to
Yep.
me, that's the play. And James Franklin even mentioned that on Tuesday. He's like, yeah, like
Yep.
that's the one that everybody saw. But yeah, to me, it was a very average performance, right? It wasn't horrible. To me, the most important thing is that he did not turn the ball over. I mean,
Yeah.
how many times do you see it, especially when the game gets a little tight with a younger quarterback, where you start forcing throws? Now, Luke Altmaier definitely did that. I leaned over to Daniel Gallen in the press box after I think it was Altmaier's third pick, and I said, "Man, he's got some Brett Favre in him." But you did not see that with Drew Aller, and to me, again, that was a really good sign. It's just another thing, right? Because let's be honest, those first two games, he's humming along. Everything looks really great. He's making bigger plays. But then you come out against Illinois and you're not pushing the ball down the field. And he got a lot of pressure in his face, especially in that first half. And it's like, okay, what does Drew Aller look like when there are these lulls in the offense? Because it's not always going to be perfect, right? Now, to your point about whether or not he should have started last year, I wrote at one point last year that it was time to give him a hard look. Um, to me, that's the one like devil's advocate thing that especially with quarterbacks, I hate to play it just because I lived and covered the Christian Hackenberg era. And to me, that's the other side of it. You say, well, you know what? maybe had the program been in a different situation, maybe if Hackenberg didn't have to play right away, maybe things go differently if he doesn't absorb a million sacks, right? So in that regard, right now it certainly looks like they've managed this pretty brilliantly with Drew, kind of being able to ease into it. But yeah, is there anything so far from Aller that you're like, man, I want to see him do this, or we haven't seen it yet? What do you still want to see, if anything?
I think the easy answer is the response to not playing at an incredibly high level, right?
Mhm.
There's no reason to believe that he won't just rebound and play at a high level again this weekend against Iowa. But this is, I mean, it's not the best defense they played so far. It's the best
But this
defense they play
secondary
all
is good.
year. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's the best
yeah.
defense they're going to see all season. Cooper DeJean is one of the best defensive backs in the country. They are swarming. They're all over you. And you mentioned the turnovers, and James has harped on the turnovers time and time again that Drew doesn't turn the ball over. He remains poised. He remains, sort of in his lane in that regard.
Mhm.
This is a game where he might not have to take as many chances as you'd think because we can talk about this more later. I don't think they need to be worried about Iowa scoring too many
Yeah.
points, at least on offense.
I'm with you, I'm with
Um,
you.
but I think this is the chance for him to show, like, hey, against, I mean, you can call it the best defense in the country if you want to. I wouldn't push back too hard on it. Against that level of defense, that he can play at a really high level with a lot of pressure on him. And for all the steady Eddie comments, that's a little less relevant against Illinois. It's a little less relevant against Delaware. It is relevant in the season opener against West Virginia.
Yeah,
This is
completely
this
irrelevant against Delaware. Completely
yeah,
irrelevant,
this
yeah.
yeah, this far outweighs any of those games, right? Like the pressure that he could be feeling, that I honestly don't know that he is because we've seen how poised and consistent that he is when he's out on the field. But this is it. This is like the opportunity. If he goes out there this weekend and he's poised and he's under control against this Iowa defense, I think it kind of makes any criticism about that null and void for, I don't know, the rest of his career, because we watched Sean Clifford for 4 years where that poise wasn't always there, right? Like he wasn't always under control. It didn't always feel like he had command of the situation. At no point watching Aller over these first 3 games have I thought he's losing this game because he's not
Mhm.
confident in himself. He doesn't feel comfortable in the pocket because he doesn't feel like he can make these throws. You mentioned the wide open potential throw to Keandre Lambert Smith. He was scanning the field. This was the thing that I saw when I rewatched the game. It wasn't that he didn't look up, it's that he just kind of, the timing was so strange that when he looked up, Keandre wasn't there. And as he continued through his progression, well, not even a progression at that point because the play had broken down, as he continued working through what he was looking for, that's when Keandre came open. By then it was too late. He had already looked back there, saw the safety
And
deep in
Keandre
the
was literally like this. I mean, I was in
yes.
the press box, he was flailing. I mean, anybody within 10 miles probably could see his arms flailing. But I think, John, too, to your point about the calm and the poise, what I looked at after that was I wanted to see, one, how did Keandre respond to that, right? To not getting the ball in that big moment, which at the very least, it's a big play, probably a touchdown. Uh,
Yes.
but two, how does Drew respond to it? And he said post game, he's like, I have to go back and watch the film because he's like, I honestly didn't see it. But there wasn't that tension, right? It was like Keandre was like, okay, yeah, we're gonna go back. Sure, we're gonna make another play. We'll figure it out. But to me, that's a sign of leadership, and that's something that players have touched on this week on our Zoom calls. We'll have more interviews on Wednesday, but that's something that Theo Johnson pointed to on Tuesday on Zoom. He said, Drew's in the huddle now. He's starting to assert himself more, right? I mean, how many times this offseason did we hear John? And this isn't a knock on him. This is just the reality of, hey, we need Drew to be more assertive, right? And it's just kind of not who he is. He's not someone who loves the limelight. That's always how he's been, right? So I think there's just that part of the job too that he's really growing and stepping into. But yeah, I'm with you. Saturday night, I think we're gonna find out what does he do against a really good defense. What does he do? Because inevitably, I'm not jinxing anything
He's going to
here.
turn the ball over at some point.
He's
It's just,
exactly. He's
yeah,
been turnover free in a Penn State
yes.
uniform for this long. At some point, it's going to happen. So how does he respond to that? And because I think there are so many weapons on this offense, we're starting to see that. But the other thing, John, and we'll have to keep an eye on this as the week progresses, and whether or not Harrison Wallace III is ready to go on Saturday or not. Um, but what stood out to you about the receiving core now that you look at it? Because to me, I think Keandre Lambert Smith is unquestionably that guy. He's the number one. We knew that coming into the year. I think he's stepped into that role so far. But the rest of it to me still seems pretty jumbled up.
Yeah, I honestly, and I know I don't think you're alone in calling him the number one. I think him and Trey Wallace are still kind of 1A and 1B just because what they bring is so different, right? Like Keandre is
Yeah.
the big play threat. They run a lot of crossers. They put him in motion to try and basically get the defense off balance to confuse their coverages and get him a little bit of space so he can go because he's, an unbelievable like long speed athlete and even short area quickness is unbelievable. But to me, Trey Wallace is the more consistent of the two receivers. And I know I asked James today about like Keandre's consistency, and he brought up that play that you mentioned and said
Mhm.
that Keandre handled it well. And so there seemed like there were no internal complaints there. But I still think from a play to play basis that maybe either they're not connecting as consistently, right? I think as Penn State fans would probably like to see. And I think Trey Wallace is the guy that, 3rd and 7, right? They trust him to
Mhm.
run a 10-yard out and he's going to get the ball. Aller's going to get it to him on time. He's going to catch it, go out of bounds, just get the 10 or 11 yards there and be done with it. Whereas I think Keandre has been the more of the big play threat. That being said, they're both excellent receivers. I think I really underestimated just how good both were going into this year. When James would talk about the receivers in the preseason, I saw, and he said this, like they had two top guys and then a bunch of guys
Yeah.
fighting for spots. In my head, I think it was, okay, these are two guys that are like usual number two receivers that are fighting for the top spot. When now it seems more like that these are two actual like potential number ones that are fighting for these spots. But the rest of those guys, they need someone to step up, to say the least, right? And I think
Yeah.
James talked about Caden Saunders today. To me, he's kind of the perfect candidate for this, right? Because the whole slot outside designation doesn't matter as much because Keandre can play in either spot.
Yep,
Frankly,
they can
Trey
move him
can
around.
too. Yeah, and so you can put Caden Saunders in the slot and be just as effective. I talk about the short area quickness. It's as elite gets with Caden Saunders. James lauded his ability to catch punts. I think that's something we've mentioned in the press box a few times during games, like just the confidence to go get a punt rather than let it bounce and lose you 15 to 20 yards. That confidence in general, it may seem insignificant because it's on special teams. That matters for a kid who seemed to not be ready for college football last year,
No,
right?
he
Like he
wasn't. I
seemed
mean,
to,
and I think,
yeah,
Caden was really honest about this last year, which
yes.
I thought was really refreshing and interesting. And he was
Especially
like, you
when
know
we
what?
spoke to him back in January, I
Yeah, in
think
the
at the
winter.
freshman media day.
Yeah, he was like, you know what? I got here and I wasn't ready for it. Physically, he wasn't ready. And James Franklin hit on that too this week. He said, you know what? He got here, but now he's got the build that while he's never going to be the biggest guy, right? And they knew this when they recruited him. He's got the build that can better withstand the Big Ten. I'm with you. He's somebody who I think they need to give a longer look at. Now, last game, you go back, catch of the game, Liam Clifford, right? I mean, the 33-yard reception, like that's the one that stands out.
By the way, we didn't mention it. That throw is, I think it's Drew's best throw of his career so far. I think it was like a 38-yard reception, but it was 60 yards from one hash across the other side of the field, dropping a dime to Liam Clifford, who made a very good catch. But to me, that
Mhm.
throw was just unbelievable.
Better than I believe it was the Indiana touchdown pass last year with the crazy arm angle.
Yeah, give me that one.
Yep.
Just because
Okay.
the and
Recency
I think
bias, sure.
listen, maybe, but
Yeah.
like the difficulty of going across your body into the other side of the field because you're opening the area, you're opening the opportunity for mistakes there, right? You're
This
opening the
is this is the
opportunity,
shouldn't do it, shouldn't do it, shouldn't. Oh, your
right?
arm's special, throw it.
Oh
Yeah.
no, oh no, oh no, yeah, great throw, at the end of it. But yeah, I thought that it was just a special throw. The timing, the anticipation, the loft that he put on that ball, which I think as he mentioned today in his Zoom call, was something that he had to develop more. The arm strength was always there. That's a good indication that that loft, that touch is there because there were two receivers running similar routes, or at least the play had broken down. They were running
Mhm.
alongside each other, and two defensive backs that were also there, and he just dropped it in perfectly. That being said, that has nothing to do with Caden Saunders, but you are right. Liam Clifford did make that big play. He is someone I think that if you were making these decisions, if you're in James Franklin's shoes, where the ideal scenario is that someone beats him out, right? Like because you know what Liam Clifford is, you know that he's good, you know that he's consistent, you know that he's going to provide value for you as a slot receiver. He's strong, he's physical, he has strong hands at the catch point, which is important, especially some of
Which
his
right
size.
now, this is what they need, right? I mean, it was a
Right.
rough go around for Malik McClain, who's done well on special teams, but
Yes.
it was gets his first start. It did not go particularly well.
Yeah, and two drops, that
Mhm.
were the first one, it happened so quickly that I actually didn't see it, right? Like, I had to, I pulled up the YouTube TV and rewound it so I could watch it and see the drop again. But yeah, just those kind of mistakes that can't happen. I mean, maybe you can get away with 1 or 2 against Iowa, can't happen against Ohio State, can't happen against Michigan. Those mistakes lose you games, and I think, honestly, if you're going to have those kind of mistakes, you have to have the upside to make up for it in some way.
Mhm.
And if I'm picking a receiver that has that upside right now, it's Caden. I think he's a potential game breaker. He is the guy that I would look at as, let's say, if Keandre were to declare next year, you look at Caden Saunders as someone like, maybe this is the guy alongside Trey Wallace next year. And I think we're going to learn a lot about him as Penn State gets deeper into the schedule. Obviously, it's a weird schedule this year, having Iowa
Very
and
weird, yeah.
then Northwestern and UMass is a very stark contrast, and then a bye week, which,
Yeah,
and I apologize to any Penn State fans if I jinx any of this, but it kind of feels like Iowa and then 3 bye weeks before Ohio State.
it very
Uh,
much does.
yeah, and so like that's a chance to get Caden a lot of those reps, get him working against maybe not so great FBS teams in Northwestern and UMass, and giving him the opportunity to show what he can do. And who knows, maybe that could reasonably happen this game. But I think there is a world where we start looking at him as the breakout candidate on the offense of the guys maybe that going into the season we weren't expecting to have that third receiver role.
He was one of my breakout candidates, but sure, John, whatever. I think when you
Then
kind
you'll
of
get credit when it comes to fruition.
That's right, I will find that, I will keep those receipts. But no, I think when you look at this weekend, the thing that I think that has to kind of give you a little bit of concern. Now let's be honest, right? Illinois, that front seven was special, right? Like they could wreck some things. They could wreck a lot of things.
As we found
Um,
out, Penn State's susceptible to that. Now, to be fair, Jerjon Newton is
yeah,
unbelievable. Like,
yeah,
I,
like,
I really like the NFL draft, the whole process and everything. And you knew about Jerjon Newton
mhm.
beforehand, and then you watch the game, you're like, oh, he was really, really good. And then you watch the game, you're like, oh, he destroyed them. Like, he wrecked any game plan they possibly could have had with the running game.
And James Franklin said on Tuesday when I asked him, I said, what did you learn about your offensive line, or what stood out to you when you watched the film back? Because I asked him about it after the game Saturday, and he said that. He's like, we had a lot of respect coming in for Newton, and leaving the game, we have a lot of respect. But to me, and this is where, the Iowa game really factors into this, right? Everything Penn State does this season is going to be graded and judged and evaluated against, okay, will this stack up against Ohio State? Will this stack up against Michigan? That's where they're at. That's what they're chasing. That's the reality of this. And so for me, you look at that performance with the offensive line, it was shaky, especially in the first half. It got better in the second half. But now I say, okay, the front for Iowa, different in some regards, but is this Penn State offensive line good enough, right? Is this a line that is built strong enough in the Big Ten? James Franklin said it this week. He said, you guys know Iowa, right? Like, this is a grinded out game. This is probably a game at some point you're going to have to rely on your running backs and pick up those tough yards. And especially early on in Franklin's career here, so much of it was we need that mentality to be able to run the ball. We need to be that, that physical, hard nosed team. Well, now we have to see if this offensive line is capable of that, right? And I think they've shown that they're at least 7 deep, right? We've gotten a good look at that rotation with Drew Shelton and Venga Ione. This is going to be like my toughest name of the
Listen,
year.
I take a lot of pride, and I practice these names way too much. That's a me problem. Venga Ioane is my favorite one because I picked up on it quick, and I've never had to revert back. It is a
It's a tough
fantastic
one.
name, first off, though.
Great
But like,
name, perfect name for an
it is,
offensive alignment,
yes,
especially.
just
Um,
an absolute monster as an offensive lineman too.
Yes, I mean he's somebody who we've seen play more snaps. But so again, you've got 7 deep at least at this point, and then but how does that translate, right? How does that translate in the Big Ten? Because with the exception of Landon Tengwall and the retirement early on, this is a line that's still been relatively healthy, right? It's been all about Fashion load management. We've heard so much about that and how they want to keep him fresh, and they've done a really nice job with that. But all of that goes out the window now, right? Like,
Yep.
this is Big Ten football. We saw it against Illinois where Olu's snap count was way back up. It was back to like the normal level. So now you got to keep him healthy. You got to keep him going. But what do you want to see most, or what will give you confidence if you see it from Penn State's offensive line Saturday night, John? What are you trying to key in on?
Yeah, one note about Olu that I thought was spectacular against Illinois. So I was sitting next to Bob Flounders of Penn Live
Bobby Flo
during
for
the game.
short.
Yeah, that's right, Bobby Flo, who remains the man. I was sitting next to him, and he pointed out, he's like, "Oh, they have Jurjan lined up against Olu," and like we were both like watching with anticipation, and Olu just walled him off. Like it was it was over so quick. Like he's an
So were the
unbelievable left
scouts
tackle.
seated behind me. This was
Yeah,
by far the largest contingent of NFL
yeah,
scouts at the Illinois game, and makes sense, right, when you see it on
yeah.
both sides.
But yeah, he is. I couldn't be more confident in a player than I am that Olu will have a fantastic rest of the season, a fantastic, frankly, NFL career, fantastic
Mhm,
whatever he wants to do with football. He is, and I don't say this word lightly, but a brilliant offensive lineman, both from an intelligence standpoint and from a physical attributes and work ethic and technique standpoint. One of the most complete offensive line prospects that I remember watching, and it genuinely unbelievable how good he is. I'm actually not as worried about Caden Wallace at right tackle as I think a lot of
mhm.
other people are. If he does slip up, you can put in Drew Shelton, and I think you're fine. Like you have a two starting level right tackles. Wallace right now, I would actually argue has more upside. If he was more consistent long term, maybe it's Shelton that has more upside. But right now, I would take Wallace and just hope the consistency clicks. The interior is a concern. It's really tough to decipher right now the level of concern because it's okay. Is it you just got wrecked because Jerzon Newton is that good, or do you have this major flaw, right? And even these, for
Yep.
as good as Iowa's front is, Newton is far
Next
superior to
level,
anything
yeah.
they've got, yeah, at defensive tackle. So despite the issues he caused, they might not have many issues at all, right, up front against Iowa. I'm actually really interested to see in how they can kind of use the shifts, the
Mhm.
movement, the sweeps, putting Keandre Lambert Smith in motion to manipulate that defensive line, to maybe get them to shift when you want them to shift, maybe get some quick throws, so they're unable to call anything out quickly. They're unable to have quick reactions. They're kind of slowed down essentially. If you can make the Iowa defense a half tick slow, you're going to win the game. I think that's plain and simple. No, I think they're going to win the game anyways. But I think if you do it that way, you can really make this convincing in a big statement type victory. I don't know that it necessarily is going to come down to how good the offensive line is as much as, and I think this will probably be a question that we're talking about a lot throughout this year, but how much Mike Yursich can manipulate that
Yeah,
defensive line, right? Like how much he can do to put the offensive line, which we know is at the very least, I would argue, good, right? Like I think we're,
yeah.
we're in agreement that is a good offensive line. And then the step
I
that you
mean,
can
now
take
to
very
keep in mind
easily.
too, like, we've seen some really bad offensive lines,
Yes.
especially I have, right? So, like, this is last year was
Listen,
noticeably
even in
improved.
only the
This is a good
even in
offensive
only the
line.
5 years, like the 5 years, there have been some really bad ones.
Oh, you
Like, and
you trust me,
I've
John, you've seen nothing.
listen, I've sadly, I was a student at Penn State. We talk about that. So, you watch the program from afar, and even then it was, they were bad. You were correct. It
Mhm.
was pretty brutal. But this is a good offensive line at the very least with an elite offensive lineman and, the upside to be much more than that, obviously, than just good. So I don't know that you're necessarily worried about them as much as you are worried about what they're able to accomplish based on play calling. And frankly, I am confident in Mike Yurcich's ability to call plays right now. I know I've seen other people with some consternation maybe about what they've been doing offensively. To me, it was clear that they opened things up a little bit against Illinois, a little more than they had in previous games. I still have to go back and double check my snap counts on that front to double check this, but I
We're big
believe they
on
had.
facts, as James Franklin
Yes,
pointed out this week. We are big on
yes, we are.
facts.
That's
Um,
but I wanna, like, double check and make sure on this, but I believe they ran more motion than they have in their previous 2 games, which is not saying a ton. Like, the West
yeah,
Virginia game was in hand, the Delaware game was, a scrimmage, but this is, I think they ran more motion, they were doing more, and I think the more they do, the more they can give the offensive line an advantage in one way or another, the better off they're gonna be.
and you've got your bread and butter with the T formation, right? I mean,
Yes.
that's your
The
staple that we've
unstoppable
seen
T
the last few
formation.
years. You're gonna keep running until they can stop it. Flipping over to the other side here, John, because you alluded to it earlier, the drive to 325 with Iowa, like, they set themselves up to essentially
This is
be a
the
gimmick all
funniest thing that's
year.
ever happened. It is I can't get enough of this. It is I check it so often. I check Iowa scores. I check how many defensive
It's a
touchdowns they
massive
have.
storyline for them, and understandably so. I mean,
Yeah.
it's made them a mockery, um, because of it, right? But again, like, I would love to be a fly on the wall when that contract stipulation was being put in, and, like, who's thinking, "Yeah, this is a great idea. This there's
I
not
wanna
gonna be
know if they
blowback."
discussed I want to know if they discussed the defensive touchdown thing. Like, I want to know if there was a
You
conversation
have
like
to
where they
think
were
they
like,
did, right?
right, and I would assume someone pushed back was like, no, we're going to count defensive touchdowns too, which is not in the
Not
purview
great.
of the offensive coordinator. But I digress.
It's
It is
definitely
it's the best thing any team has done this year by far. I would like to thank the Iowa program for giving us all this opportunity to track all of this.
I mean, it is just like I get it. It's your way to show your fan base that you're well aware there's a problem, right? But like, it's made you even more like laughable from the outside looking in.
Well, and the
Um,
number's so low, like
yeah,
25 points per
24
game
points
is
a
not
game.
like it's not like you're killing it. It's like you're
You've
hitting
got to
the
run it up in
baseline.
non-conference play, right? Like
Yeah,
that's the
it
thing. But
was a 41 points against Western Michigan,
yeah,
and it's not good.
but if you're them, we've seen it. I mean, we've seen it a lot in the whiteouts, especially, right? They will play that ugly style of football and rely on that really talented defense, especially that secondary. That's always been their recipe. Um, but for me, I look at it and I say, okay, I feel pretty confident that Penn State's still going to be able to move the ball despite what they're going up against. Flip it over to the other side, Manny Diaz in this defense. Really, last week, I mean, the only blemish, this is like really nitpicking here. The opening drive, the tackling was not great. It looked like shades of Michigan last year to me.
I wasn't going to invoke it, but if you
I
insist.
went there. I went there. But then everything buttoned up and it looked a lot better, right? So you can't have those lapses like they did. And obviously the touchdown run there, he carried two or three, maybe even more players into the end zone with him, right? Like not great teach tape for tackling there either. But this is a really good, really talented Penn State defense. I still don't think, again, we've seen from a stat perspective what we're going to see as the year goes on from the defensive ends. That's not a knock on them. That's just the numbers aren't there, despite the fact that they're playing really well. That's part of the game. That's part of getting the ball out quickly. The opportunities just quite frankly haven't been there. But to me, you look at it and I say, okay, Penn State now, and this is also crazy, but after last weekend, it makes sense. They're +7 in the turnover margin, right? I mean, that is one of the best ranks in the country. And you say, okay, not only are you +7, but we're seeing the takeaways come from a lot of different guys. So if you are Brian Ferentz, John, I am bestowing this upon you.
Why would you? That
If
feels
you
like
are
something you've said to me today.
if you are Brian Ferentz, what do you try and do? How do you try and exploit a Penn State defense that so far hasn't really shown many weaknesses?
I'm I'm hoping,
I
right?
stumped him.
Like
There we go. I stumped him.
it's yeah, it's tough. I would be running the ball like relentlessly. I
Yeah.
think that's the only avenue
Mhm.
they have. And here's the thing, like
It's the
I
Michigan
don't think
recipe.
yeah, but I don't think Cade McNamara is that bad. But he hasn't looked great. And like again, it's more credence to this idea that maybe the Iowa offense is the issue and not the players. I to me, if they're running the ball less than 35 times, they failed heading into this, right? Like I think
Mhm.
they've got to try to do it. And if it doesn't work, frankly, like you're done anyways. Like if they're in a situation where they're throwing the ball against this Penn State defense, probably going to add to that turnover margin. It's only going to get better for Penn State, and suddenly I think you're going to be in a bad situation. I talked about this a lot leading up to the West Virginia game. I wrote about it a lot with that, and even Illinois. These are not teams that are built to come from behind. They're built
Yep.
to play from ahead, right? So Iowa needs to score first. If they go down 7, it's not great. If they go down 10, 14,
Game
17,
over.
it's over. And like if it could genuinely, if it's like 13-0 in the second quarter and Penn State has the ball, it's like this might be a wrap. Like this might be,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? There might not be an opportunity for them to
Great for
score at
us
this
on
point.
deadlines that night.
Yeah.
That would be a
No,
blessing.
genuinely fantastic. I've gotten to write a lot of takeaway stories very early in games this year. I've been very appreciative of that fact.
And
But
Penn State
the
hasn't trailed at all this year, right? That's the
I
other
don't
part of
believe they
this,
have. Yeah.
right?
It's
No, they haven't.
been unless
Well,
they did
thank
against West Virginia, and I'm forgetting it because it was in 8 o'clock game, and we were all a little delirious at that point for an
yeah.
opening night. Uh, but no, I think like they've got to run, they've got to run, they've got to run, they've got to run. If that fails, they got to run a little more. I frankly I don't think Penn State's going
And
to have too much of an issue.
their running back situation right now doesn't help
Yeah,
this. That's the other part.
they're out 2 running backs.
Yeah.
LaShawn Williams is their starter right now. I believe he's their second/third running
Mhm.
back at this point. They had a bit of a timeshare past the starter, but this is this is a Penn State defense that's struggling against the run. Yes. You mentioned that the defensive ends haven't been necessarily putting up the numbers from a pass rush perspective. It's funny. I think the case has kind of been the opposite with the linebackers, where we've seen them kind of rack up some tackles, but
Yeah.
I've kind of wondered if they've been at this level that Penn State would hope they would be at, right? I think Abdul Carter has not been the Abdul Carter we saw last year. I think at least the version that people anticipated going into this
The
year. He's
splash
been
plays, right?
Yeah, he's
That's
been
yeah.
really good, but, like, it's sometimes he's over aggressive and he missed a tackle. We saw it. Garrett
Mhm.
Green beat him on a running play just because
Yes.
he outran him, right? Like, and because, Abdul Carter tried to make, too much of a play rather than breaking down, making the tackle. Um, Curtis Jacobs has been pretty good, but I think there have been some mistakes there too, and, Kobe King has actually been pretty great for Penn State this year. I've been pretty surprised
Massive.
by that. Yeah, and
Yeah,
it's
I
it's
mean,
added stability because
they
Tyler
needed it.
Elston Tyler Elston has just struggled, right? The touchdown against Delaware it looked like he pressed the line, he missed his gap, and then he got beat, which happens, but, like, it's the kind of mistake that you're not used to seeing against Delaware, right?
Right.
And
I mean,
Elston
he's
Elston's
someone who will continue to play special teams,
Yes,
but the snap count has gone down, right? I believe
yes.
we use True Media at the Athletic. Per True Media, Elston played 11 snaps on defense against Illinois, right? So
I would love to know
they,
how many of those were post, like, 3rd
yeah,
quarter,
later
right?
on in
You
the
know what I mean?
game,
How
for
many of
sure,
those
for
came late
sure.
in the game, and because
And I
he's
think but that's again where you see the depth and the competition on this team. They needed Kobe King to step up in the worst way.
Yep.
He's done it. You look at Penn State's secondary, and everybody, in the offseason is like, okay, well, you lost Joey Porter Jr., you lost Jair Brown. They haven't missed a beat, right? I mean, I want to go and look at the numbers because Kalen King, James Franklin mentioned it too, like has not been targeted much, which is like the Joey Porter Jr. treatment last year. Johnny Dixon had the kind of pick that we might just need to close the case on it right now and say that's the best pick we might see this season.
I don't know. I think the, Daquan Hardy
You're more
one
of a
might have
Hardy
been
guy.
even better. Yeah,
Interesting.
this was so
Interesting.
I lean Hardy here because and to be clear, both of them fantastic plays.
Yeah.
Dixon, the timing of it probably matters more for Johnny Dixon's because it
Mhm.
was, Illinois made a big play, and Dixon picked the pass off. Daquan Hardy is listed at 5'9". Casey Washington is listed at 6'2", and Illinois essentially just tried him, right? Like they
Yeah.
saw
Oh, yeah.
him and they went after him. Daquan Hardy beat him at the catch point, went up and got it, and just and when you're that size and you're facing a guy 5 inches listed at 5 inches taller than you, to be clear, we don't know the actual size difference. Listed at is
Right.
important there. I think it might be a little bigger than 5 inch difference.
Are you going to bring
Um,
your tape measure to practice this week? Is that
I am absolutely not going to do that. But I do think like that is one of the most impressive picks that I've seen all year. He is, and I wrote, about Daquan after that. I thought that was a phenomenal play. You know what I mean? One of the best we're going to see all season.
he was back? He was gone for 2 games. Would not say why, but he was unavailable. He was wearing a scout team jersey, so
Yep.
you can kind of try to piece things together there if you want. But speaking of piecing things together, John,
Oh, it's been a long 3 weeks.
you it's been a long 3 weeks for us. It's very long 3 weeks. Um, During our drive last week through
Yes.
Illinois to get to Normal, Illinois, which Bloomington Normal, we didn't even know that was an
Bloomington
actual
Normal. We'll,
place.
we'll add the full name in there.
Yeah, for a hot second we thought we were going to Bloomington, Indiana, and that we've made a terrible mistake, but we did not. Um, I stopped because I'm a very nice driver. I stopped
That's right.
alongside the road. Well, it was a road stop. I was being even nicer because you had a couple phone calls to make for stories that you're working on this week. So
Yes.
tell these fine folks here what you're working on and why I had to pull over so you could make these phone calls
Well,
while I had to go pace around a Dairy Queen.
let's be clear here. We stopped so you could get a blizzard at Dairy Queen. We can
That was
pretend that
part
it
of
was
it.
for my work. But no, I actually, made a phone call to Alan Robinson, made a phone call to Grant Haley, later in earlier this week, actually spoke to Tom Bahali, spoke to Anthony Morelli, spoke to Trace McSorley, spoke to Dan Connor, right?
So
Talked to
either
all these
you're name
people,
dropping or I'm hoping you're writing
or
about the whiteout.
yeah, or there's something coming here, right? All of these people that have had these massive moments in whiteout history, right? Robinson had 2013 against Michigan, Haley and McSorley 16 against Ohio State, Tom Bahali, Dan Connor 05 against Ohio State, kind of having them recollect what they remembered about these massive moments, because I think we'd probably agree those are the three biggest moments in whiteout history at this point. And so tomorrow, Wednesday, September 20th, hoping to publish the story on what these guys remember and these big moments and what it means to them to be involved in those moments. Story had a lot of fun reporting. You and I, a little inside baseball here. This is you and I talk a lot about like what we're doing and what we're working on.
Yeah.
And I think you could probably tell that I was fairly excited to write this one because it's, sometimes stories are more reporting intensive, sometimes they're more writing intensive. This one was definitely more reporting intensive, and getting those guys memories and what they remember about games, 18 years ago, 10 years ago, and even recently 7 years ago. It was a really cool thing to talk to those guys about. They were all great. There were some fun stories in there, but you can find that tomorrow at centerdaily.com.
Yeah, and I think you're right about some of the stories. They're more writing intensive, others more reporting intensive. But you and I are both very similar minded in that regard of like, we love the craft of writing and rewriting and figuring out what are these different stories and
Yep.
what angles can we take. One of the things I'm doing this week, gosh, you're old when you start looking back at every Penn State whiteout. Because again, just to be clear, this is the 15th full stadium whiteout coming Saturday night, which is why we were so
That's right.
freaked out about it.
Number 15.
Number 15, Taylor Swift wrote a song about 15.
Well, we don't need to do this.
We can go there if we need to, but I'm ranking them based off of most memorable to least memorable, or I get least to most, right? One of the games that I had slightly forgotten about, and Penn State fans don't want to hear this because this was a loss, but the Adrian Claiborne blocked punt returns it for a touchdown. That was 2009. I was a student then. I was in the student section. I remember how quiet it was, right? That moment happens. The student section goes silent. It had rained all day. And again, I didn't grow up on Penn State football, went here for the education and never planned to stay. And fast forward many years, I'm still here.
Here we are.
Here we are. But, just sitting there, it's like you remember these moments and you remember the sounds, right? I mean, the moment that Grant Haley takes off down the field, Penn State is hitting Kerncraft 400 before he even gets to the end zone, and this place just erupts. I mean, to me, that is the loudest moment in my time on the beat that I have heard. Like, that is just one of those moments that, again, even here, right? Like, we're journalists, we're objective. Like, whatever gets us out of the press box faster is what we're in favor of.
Yeah.
But moments like that, you're like, man, this is really cool. This thing is really special, right? Like this whiteout is a special thing.
Situation. Like you can really.
I mean, literally, the
it.
press box was shaking.
Yeah.
But
well, in 2016, that was actually my senior year at Penn State, so I was in the student section for that one.
Okay.
And it was that kind of thing where, and this is a little teaser for the story, but a lot of these guys describe the same feeling where it's almost like shock that you go into, right, or kind of black out, like you just kind of. It's like dead silent despite it being so loud around you, and kind of the noise like slowly fills in around you and you really start to hear it there at the end. But yeah, I think this was, and I'm, like you said, you're doing the ranking of the story and everything. This is one of my favorite things I've worked on so far this year. Hopefully there will be many more of those.
And John, because I am a woman of random stories, I spent about 45 minutes on the phone today with a German DJ.
Elite
that
stuff.
Is, when the editor checks in.
I'm very looking forward to reading. Like this is, we've been talking about this as a possibility this weekend. I'm glad this happened.
Yes.
I am very excited to read this story.
Yeah. I am working on a story about Kerncraft 400, right? It's the song that many people think is Zombie Nation, which is actually the name of the album by Kerncraft 400.
Correct.
So I talked to the man who produced the song, but there's a wild backstory behind it. It's really been fun to put together, but that song is so much a part of this whole thing, right? You think about the whiteout, how it started, very like organic grassroots marketing, because you got to remember, like 2007 social media wasn't what it is now. I mean, this thing started with fans with bullhorns and students handing out cards telling people, hey, wear white next week for the first ever full stadium whiteout against Notre Dame, right? So like, makes us sound in some ways like we're in the Stone Age, but that was 2007. John, you might have still been in diapers in 07. I'm not sure, but
I was 12 at that point.
Okay, that was my junior year of high school, so a little bit older. But yeah, I mean, these are a lot of fun stories. We know that Saturday night is going to be crazy. We expect the crowd is going to be amped as always. If you're coming to the game, you always know the deal. Traffic getting out of here after a night game is horrendous. pack your patience. Hope you have a great time. But John, before we wrap up today, we'll be back Sunday. We will have a post-game episode. Our plan moving forward is 2 shows a week. So we will do like a midweek show and then post-game as soon as we were done writing. Typically, we'll then fire up the microphones and kind of let out all of our scorching hot takes and hope they go over well
on a post-game show.
But predictions before we get out of here. I'm going Penn State 24, Iowa 14. And to me, honestly, the 24 might seem a little bit low. But I do think at some point that Drew Aller turnover number 1 happens. But I don't think that this is a game that really is going to be in question much. I think Penn State, again, as we've seen so far this season, there's just so much talent all the way around. And this is an Iowa offense that, unless they make mistakes, right? Unless Iowa gets a special teams touchdown, a defensive touchdown, which that's definitely the book possible here, right? Right. This could be a game where we see a safety, something weird like that, because that is just how quirky this thing might get. But I'm going Penn State 24, Iowa 14. What do you have so I can hold it against you to see how right or wrong you are?
So I am going with Penn State 23, Iowa 7. I think there's a chance.
No respect at all.
That's a bad offense. It's a really bad offense. Many people, my wife included, will tell you I watch too much football. I think most sane people will tell you that I watch too much Iowa football just because I think it's very amusing. I actually watch a lot of Iowa State too, same with Minnesota, for the same reason. I think it's amusing.
Is this a cry for help, John? Is this?
I think it sounds like one. I don't
blink
know
twice if you're doing this at will.
Yeah, right. Like this is some real sicko stuff here, but I think this is a chance for Drew Aller to go in, not necessarily manage a game, but make a couple plays and prove that, like, hey, I can do it against an elite defense. I think that's what they're going to do. Like, I just don't think Iowa's good enough to score. I know that sounds really, really straightforward for those interested. I believe the spread is at 14.5 points now, which it started at 13.5, which is fascinating. A lot of people seemingly having a lot of confidence in Penn State covering that if it's moving by a point already and it's only Tuesday. But yeah, this is
also, I'm sorry, go ahead. Just when you mentioned the spread, one of the things that jumped into my mind, the weather on Saturday is something that's creeping up,
rainy.
Very rainy. So that, again, something to keep in mind when you're looking at these things, but Penn State can run the ball. They can run the ball.
Yeah. And I think my favorite thing that I'm looking forward to as a person who is afraid of heights is the press box shaking while it's raining. I am going to have a great time Saturday. I'm so excited. Can you hear it in my voice?
John died doing what he loved, covering a night game. Yeah.
That's right. Well, truly, I do love those night games. But we will get there, and it will be a fantastic time. I think that's a good place to leave it for this week, though. You can find all of my work at centerdaily.com covering Penn State football. You can find Audrey at The Athletic covering Penn State football, doing fantastic work there. Don't tell her I said that, despite her hearing it right here, right now. That'll do it for this week's episode. Very much looking forward to talking to you all on Sunday. See you soon.